Hello, I'm so glad to be with you today. Let's jump right in. My name is Elise Schuster, and I'm one of the co-founders of OKSO. Today, we are going to be talking about strategies that we can use when people are in crisis to help ourselves stay centered. So as we get started, let's take a minute to reflect on any past situations we've been in where someone was having some kind of emergency situation. Maybe it was really urgent, or maybe it felt urgent to them, but they came to us with that energy. How did you feel in that moment? Did you notice any change in how you felt? Take a second and remember back to that space. Throughout this training, I will be referring to the worksheet that you have. I really encourage you to pause this video whenever you need to fill out the worksheet. We find taking that time to reflect can be really, really helpful. So, let's talk about what an emergency is. You may have a different definition in your organization or company, but generally, this is what I'm working with when I'm thinking about emergencies. An emergency is something that has to be handled within a few hours, or there could be potential harm to someone. And that person could be the person that you are with, or it could be someone else. So, what can these kinds of things be? The first is someone who is really angry. Someone who, if that anger continues to escalate, it could turn into violence. We also have mandated reporter situations where we are legally obligated to act. This, of course, is only applicable to people who are under 18. You may also be interacting with someone who has no place to stay that night. And of course, there are people who are at risk of harming themselves or harming someone else. Lastly, there are medical situations. So take a moment and see if there's anything that you would want to add to this list based on our definition. If there's a risk of harm to someone within a few hours, if action isn't taken, and feel free to write those down on your worksheet. So that's really the definition that we're working with here. So those are things that are actual emergencies. Then we have the things that might feel like emergencies to someone else, but aren't actually emergencies. So what are those kinds of things? These are things like having an assignment due or some kind of application, missing an appointment, a fight with someone that they care about, something intense that happens to them. Maybe there are times when someone can get supplies and it's outside of those hours. So take a second and write down on your worksheet some examples of things that can frequently feel like emergencies to folks, but that under our definition of an emergency, remember, harm to someone within a few hours, aren't actually emergencies. Now, I want to be super, super clear that these can all be really intense things for people. They're intense for us too when we experience them, but they are not the same thing as someone who is suicidal or someone who's having a medical emergency. The reason why I'm kind of making that distinction is that because sometimes when someone approaches us with this emergency energy, it is really easy for us to kind of get wrapped up in that energy too. And so what we're talking about today is both what to do in an actual emergency, but also how do we create some space when it's not an emergency so that we're not stepping in as if it is. So sometimes what happens is people come to us in that sort of state of fight, flight, freeze. And it really is easier than we think for us to take on that state as well and to start making decisions from that place. So let's talk about some strategies for staying centered. What do I mean by centered here? I don't mean that we are a Zen master. I mean that we are in control of our feelings and emotions, and that we are in the driver's seat of those. We're able to think about decisions before we make them, and we're able to make them rationally and not from a place of fear or a place of panic. So the first thing that we need to try to figure out is is this an actual emergency? I know that sounds basic, but it's actually really easy to hear something and kind of jump to a conclusion about what's happening. If we instead, we can stop and gather more information and ask questions, we might discover that what we thought was an emergency is not an emergency at all. So, for example, someone might say to us, I want to die. And in our minds, we jump right into safety planning. We're assuming that person is going to take their own life. If instead we had stopped and asked them to tell us a little bit more, we might have found out that actually they feel this way really frequently, and they feel very clear that they would never actually kill themselves. It's a figure of speech that they use, and they aren't suicidal at all. I have had this personal situation happen to me. These are the kinds of things that can happen. If it is an emergency, and also if it isn't an emergency, right? Kind of in either case, the next thing that we really want to try to do is slow things down. The other person's energy or our own worry or fear about that situation may really cause us to feel like we need to act quickly. And really, with the exception of a medical emergency, most situations are not immediately threatening. Even someone who's highly escalated or agitated, who is walking around yelling, may really just need someone else around who is calm. So the more that we can kind of catch ourselves when we have that impulse to just jump right into action, the better. Often what we're trying to do in those moments is contain it because it feels scary to us. But containing something often doesn't actually solve it. It often needs a lot more space than that. So how do we actually slow things down? How do we do that? One of the ways that I really keep myself from going too quickly during a crisis is my breathing. So why is there a box here? I like to use something that's called box breathing. Basically, you imagine that you're making a box, or really a square, with your breathing. So you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. So let's try it right now. If you've never tried box breathing, this is a great time to do it. So we're going to inhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. The reason why I'm bringing box breathing into this is that it has been shown to calm our nervous system. And it's one way of getting our own bodies out of that kind of fight, flight, freeze mode that they can get into. So once you've been able to slow down, now it's really time to check in with yourself. So there are 3 questions that you can ask yourself. And I want to note that these 3 questions come from an amazing program called the Therapeutic Crisis Intervention Training, which was developed by Cornell University.